We're in Esther chapter 6. We continue from chapter 5 after the first banquet. And then Esther requested for the presence of the king as well as Haman the next day. And so after that, they all went home, and that is where we begin chapter 6. Very interestingly is that in these last few chapters, there is a lot more detail concerning the plot and the description and the narrative as to how people felt and what exactly happened on a blow-by-blow style. So we can see a lot more things that's happening. And the plan of Esther has begun. And so Esther said that you come back tomorrow and I will tell you everything that I want. That everything that she wants will either get her killed or get her saved. But at this point in time, it is now really upsetting Haman because of Mordecai. And along the way, when we did chapter 5, we saw that Haman built a gallows, a place to hang, which is very tall, probably exceeding 70 feet high. As you know, anything that is that high, it is to be made a spectacle for everyone to see. Don't cross Haman. If you cross Haman, this will be your consequence. Now, nobody knew about this plan, and so now we enter into chapter 6. In chapter 6, the story begins that the king that night cannot sleep. Okay? And this is the statement. The word cannot sleep is very Chinese. It literally means the sleep went away. It's a very, very visual and vivid picture. The king could not sleep because sleep went away, he went ronda, and the king could not fall asleep. So that was that whole picture. And so he asked somebody to bring the records, the book of records of the Chronicles. What this means is that this records the things that the king wants to remember. It's a very interesting book because it is a book of remembrance. And if you know, in chapter 2, something happened and the king said, hey, write this down. And so the king called for this book. And as they were reading it before the king, and so the king doesn't read, right? And the officials came before the king and read to the king. And so the king was sitting there listening. And verse 2 says, then he found about Mordecai. And if you notice, Mordecai was probably the last entry that was in the book. And there was a situation that happened that was about Bigthana and Teresh. Two of the king's officials here, the doorkeepers, had wanted to take hold of the king. Now, lay hands on the king is very, very specific. This is actually what it means, lay hands on the king. Now, what does that mean? What is it as an idiom? Maybe it is to kidnap. I don't know, right? Maybe it's to kill. But basically, it says to do something bad to the king. And I want us to go back to Esther chapter 2. Esther chapter 2 verse 21, the last section of chapter 2. I want to draw your attention again. It's about Mordecai sitting within the king's gate and saw these two of the king's eunuchs, right? Or officials, Bigtan and Teresh. They were angry with the king and wanted to lay hands on the king. And this matter became known to Mordecai. He told it to Queen Esther. Esther informed the king. Now, this was what I had asked you to pay attention to, and I want to draw your attention. In Mordecai's name, right? This is a very important piece of word because Queen Esther did not say all this on her own accord, but in representing Mordecai. In representing Mordecai means in Mordecai's name. This is a very Jewish or a very Hebrew way of doing things. When you do it on behalf of another, it is in that person's name. So Queen Esther actually reported to the king on behalf of his father, right? Because Mordecai took care of her as like a father. And so in Mordecai's name means Esther told the king, this is what Mordecai said. So when you go and speak to the king in somebody's name, you are representing that somebody. And that is the intent. And that is the character of the engagement of the actions. That is why this word is so important, in Mordecai's name. So when you do something in the king's name, so you're actually doing it with the same intent, the same character of the king. So when Esther informed the king, it was in the same character of Mordecai. Not only that the king knew that it was Mordecai, the king also knew how passionate and how concerned Mordecai was for the king. And it was communicated in that respect. So I guess I wanted you to see, coming back to this passage, what it means that Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. So think about it, when you talk about in the name of somebody. And because of this, there was an inquiry made and confirmed. Both were hanged on a gallows. So immediately you can see that the idea of hanging has been there since chapter 2. Gallows is also there. So that in chapter 5, when Haman built the gallows, it is not a new thing in our story. But more importantly, for our purpose, you can also see this. And it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. And so it was recorded in that very book that the king read in chapter 6. And so in verse 3, the king said, what honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? What does it mean? The idea was to reward Mordecai because Mordecai saved the king's life. Saved the king's life. And so the idea here of honor would be what reward, right? What precious reward do we give Mordecai? And the word translated as greatness, it is this word dignity, greatness. To let the world know how important Mordecai is now before the king. This has to do with, in the British, it's the knighthood. In Malaysia, it would be, awarding you a tun or whatever title, right? So this is what the king is saying. What things have we given to him? What is the reward And how do we make him look great for Mordecai? Remember? Because Esther did it in the name of Mordecai. And now the king, when he can't sleep, happened to think about this. And the servant said, nothing has been done for him. And that in itself troubled the king. It troubled the king. Now, what is interesting is that this is actually in the night. Verse 4. Who is in the court? The king said. Actually, it would be very strange to ask who is in the court, because in the middle of the night, nobody would come. But then Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to suggest that the king hang Mordecai on the gallows he had prepared for him. This is the over 70 feet gallows. So he fixed the gallows. He came to ask the king's permission. But notice it's always at the outer court. Nobody can come into the inner court. So only the king can ask you to come in. So even Haman, the officials, can't simply walk in and out. The king's servants said, oh, Haman is there standing in the court. And that's the outer court, right? Outer court means it's the waiting room, right? You just wait there for the king. And so the king said, let him come in. Because the king is in his house. So if you remember what we had drawn the last time, it's like this. The throne, the door, and this is the outer court. And here would be the king's palace. And so the king was here. And Haman was here. Because the outer court is also the front part of the king's house, the palace. So this is how it usually is laid out. So when Esther came in chapter 5, that was in the outer court. And so now the king says, let him come in. Not at the throne, likely would be in the house. All right? And so we continue. Verse 6. So Haman came in and the king asked him, let me ask you this. This was a very interesting question. He said, what shall be done for the man whom the king delights to honor? Delights means desire. Happy. Right? Happy to do something about. Happy intent. Remember honor? Honor is anything, something precious. What do we do to somebody who is like that? That I really want to give something precious. Now, this word honor is not the 10 commandments. Honor your father and mother. That's kavod. This is not kavod. This literally means something that is precious, that you want to give it to somebody that you want to reward. Honor as to the father and mother is to put weight. It's like glory of God. It's something that you place weight and value to God, right? Now, in this case, this word honor means to give something precious. Now, Haman, of course, jumped the gun, right? He thought to himself that maybe who else would the king want to give than me? He thinks that he is already in the king's good books. And so Haman says, since it's for me, well, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let a royal robe be brought, which the king has worn. Now that is important because when you say the royal robe, the king has won, and a horse which a king has ridden, and a royal crest be placed on its head. This is the crest on the head of the horse, right? Not on Haman's head. And then let this robe and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array, means get the prince to help this person that the king delights to honor, dress him up, and then parade him on horseback through the city square and proclaim before him, thus shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. Well, he was really thinking out loud. And you need to understand this. Royal robe is actually the king's robe. And only the king wears that, so that you are signified as the king. But it is something that the king has worn, means it is something very personal that is given to this person. That this reward is a personal gift. The horse is also a personal horse that the king has rode on it. And so this is a symbolic gesture to tell one and all that this person who is sitting on the horse with the robe is someone that the king personally has rewarded. Now, in those days, and I think even in these days, if that's the case, everybody would know that, wow, no, this person really has the good pleasure of the king. And so that is his plan, because he thought that he was the one who was going to be rewarded. Now, the surprise in verse 10. The king said to Haman, okay, quickly take the robe and the horse. Here it is, as you have suggested, and do so for Mordecai the Jew. You see, the king knows Mordecai is a Jew. But why was the king not upset with Mordecai the Jew? Was two things. Number one, Mordecai saved his life. Number two, the king did not know what Haman had planned in the decree, to kill all the Jews in one day. That's why the king had no idea. And so this is the thing. The one that the king really values a lot would be Haman. So Haman should do this for Mordecai. Leave nothing undone of all that you have spoken. And now, verse 11, Haman took the robe and the horse, dressed up Mordecai, whom he is so angry with, led him on horseback through the city, and proclaimed before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. After this whole episode, verse 12, Mordecai went back to the king's gate. But Haman was so angry. So angry. Verse 12 says he was mourning. He was mourning. So notice this word. And with his head covered. This is a very interesting expression. Right? A very interesting expression. This word mourning is lament, like lamentations, right? He is crying. He is so pained in the heart. The heart is so broken, but it is because of shame. Because he thought that he was going to be the one honored, but in fact, it was Mordecai whom he wants to kill. The second part is that he had his head covered, and he is so ashamed. He is so ashamed. He thought that he could shame other people by having them lead him into the city square, but instead he was the one who did it for the man he so hated, Mordecai the Jew. Verse 13. When Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends, remember his friends? These are not your real friends. Remember? Verse 13. These are people who loved him, called his friends. The loving him idea is that these are the people who were there with him because he was powerful. And so they would say things and encourage him to do things which he would want to hear. And so he went to them and he complained. All his wise men and his wife said to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him. Now, this is important. Verse 13 means this. After all these people were saying, if Mordecai is a Jewish man right here, and that you want to before whom you have begun to fall, right? Begun to fall means you are treating of no value, right? You're treating of no value. Treating of no value. And then you are cast down. Meaning, Mordecai, whom Haman wants to treat of no value and wants to cast him down, is of Jewish descent. These friends and wives said, you know what? You will not be able to prevail. And this is the word. You cannot overcome him. They are already predicting this fact that he cannot overcome Mordecai. But instead, you will fall. This is the Hebrew expression, right? You will start to fall and you will be completely down. And what this means is that Mordecai will be victorious over you. You cannot overcome him, and you will definitely fall. Definitely fail. Definitely be knocked down. Now, these are very humbling words that you have to pay attention to. That after these things have happened, it says two things. One, Queen Esther now has the favor of the king, the grace of the king. 2 days of banquet. Now, tonight, when the banquet comes, she will also say what she wants. The second thing is, Mordecai, whom you want to kill, you want to destroy, he came back and you have to show him off in the streets. And the friends, those who love Haman and the wife said, you know what? You are going to fail. You are definitely going to fail. So let us go to our last verse. The last verse is just a passing verse, but it's important because it leads us on into Esther chapter 7. While they were still talking, the king's officials came and wanted to quickly bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. And so now he has no chance to recover and think and plot. And now he is on the way to the banquet. this is the end of chapter 6. Any questions?
Well, that means a plan that's backfire.
Yes. Big time.
Ah,
So why is it that when Haman wanted to go and see king, he never worried that king, if king refused to see him, then he will be cut. He will be caught and then he will be killed, isn't it? Just like when
Esther.
Esther wanted to go and see the king, she is so worried. But why
Yes.
is it Haman is not worried?
Because Haman feels very proud that he already has the favor of the king. That's what he's saying. The king has listened to him. The king has issued decrees under his name. He's willing to do things for the king, and the king has agreed. But the king didn't know what the decree was about. So he thought to himself, he is the king's blue-eyed boy. And certainly he was. Certainly he was, because when the king asked him, how do you want to reward a person like that? He wanted to make sure that the king's most trusted and most loved person would lead the horse. And that was him.
yeah, right.
Except that the one riding the horse wasn't him.
Mordecai.
Hmm.
Okay.
So he was overconfident.
Confident.
Okay?
Okay, right.
All right. We will continue on Monday.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank Pastor.